In this video, I am going to share a step-by-step pattern of making this crochet shivlingam, which you can put it in your puja room or gift it to your friends and family members. So let's get started. Hey guys, welcome to DIYKraftZ. I've designed this pattern in black color yarn, but as black color is difficult for you to identify the stitches over the video, I'm using a gray color yarn for the video tutorial. This one is a 4-ply 100% cotton yarn, and along with this I am using a 2.5 mm crochet hook. However, you can use your favorite yarn along with its suitable hook size. Now let us begin by making a magic ring. Make a circle on your hand as shown in the video. Now from the center, insert your hook, take the working end and pull up a loop. Hold the loop on the hook and adjust the center by pulling the starting tail end. Now hold the circle, adjust the loop on your crochet hook, then make chain 1. So that's the magic ring. Now into the center, we are going to start making the first row. Hold the circle, insert your needle into the center, yarn under and pull up a loop. Then make a single stitch. So that's the first stitch in your first row. So if you are new to making patterns, put a stitch marker on top of the first stitch. That's the first stitch of the first row. We are going to make total 6 single stitches in the center. Again, insert the needle into the center, drop a loop and make 1 single stitch. So that's the second single stitch. Again, insert and drop a loop, yarn over and complete the third stitch. Now we are making the 4th single stitch. And then 5 and finally the 6th one. You can check the count by checking the V stitches on top of the first row. Now pull the starting tail end and this will close the magic center completely. Now let's start making the second row. Remove the stitch marker. Insert your hook on the top of the first stitch or the stitch from which the stitch marker has been removed from, and in that stitch we are making a single stitch increase, which means we'll make 2 single crochet stitches into the same stitch. So that's the first single stitch in the second row, and to mark the beginning of the second row I'm putting the stitch marker into this newly made stitch. Now put the needle into the same stitch, take out the loop and then make a second stitch. So that's a single stitch increase in the first stitch. Now we are going to repeat this single stitch increase for total 6 times. We have already completed the first one and this is the second repetition. 1 single stitch and in the same stitch we are making second single stitch. So that's the single stitch increase in the second stitch. That's the second repetition. Now we are making the third repetition. Insert, pull up a loop and single stitch and make 1 more single stitch in the same stitch. And then 2 single stitches in the next stitch. That's the 4th repetition. Now single stitch increase in the 5th stitch. That's the 5th repetition. And finally single stitch increase in the last stitch. That is the 6th repetition. This completes the second row with 12 single stitches. Now remove the stitch marker and let's start making the third row. Make 1 single stitch in the next stitch and then put the stitch marker back, and this marks the beginning of the third row. That's 1 single stitch, and in the next stitch we are making a single stitch increase, that is 2 single stitches into the same stitch. That's 1 and then the second one into the same stitch. Now for the third row we are going to repeat this pattern of 1 single stitch and 1 increase for 6 times, as we have already completed the first repetition. Now moving forward and making the second repetition. So that's 1 single stitch in the first stitch, and in the next stitch we are making an increase, that is 2 single stitches worked into the same stitch. That's 1 and 2. This completed the second repetition, 1 stitch and 1 increase. And now that's the third repetition, 1 single stitch and then 1 increase. And continue this pattern throughout the row until you reach the starting point, and you'll have a total of 6 repetitions, and you'll have 18 single stitches by the end of the third row. Now I have completed the last increase of the third row, and this is the shape you will get. Now remove the stitch marker and let's start making the fourth row. So for the fourth row, the pattern is 1 stitch, 1 increase and 1 stitch. Here the stitch refers to single crochet. So we'll begin with 1 single stitch, put the stitch marker on the top of the first stitch, and this marks the beginning of the fourth row. Now in the next stitch, make 1 increase, that is 2 single stitches worked into the same stitch. So that's an increase. And now in the next stitch, make 1 single stitch. So for this fourth row, we are going to repeat this pattern of 1 stitch, 1 increase and 1 stitch throughout the row. So we are going to the second repetition. So begin with 1 single stitch and then make an increase. Now make 1 more single stitch. That completes the second repetition. 1 stitch, 1 increase and 1 stitch, and repeat it throughout the row for 6 times until you reach the starting point. Here I am making the last 1 single stitch, and this completes the fourth row with 24 single stitches. Now remove the stitch marker and let's start making row 5. And from row 5 to row 10, we are going to make 1 single stitch in each and every stitch in all the rows from row 5 to row 10. So we have started 1 single stitch and we put a stitch marker in that, and then continue to make 1 single stitch in each and every stitch throughout the row until you reach the starting point, and we will do the same thing for the rest of the rows until row 10. The row 10 should also be done in the same pattern. Once the 10 rows are completed, this is how your project should look like. Now moving forward, let's start making row 11. So for that, we'll remove the stitch marker and then we'll start by making 1 slip stitch. That's the slip stitch, and we are not counting this slip stitch as a stitch, it's just a dummy stitch. Now let's start making the 11th row. So insert your needle only into the back loop of the stitch and then make 1 single stitch. And you put a stitch marker in this single stitch as the beginning of the 11th row. And we are leaving front loops and working only in the back loops of the 10th row. So once we put a stitch marker, continue to make 1 single stitch in each of the next stitches until you reach the starting point. And don't forget to put your needle only into the back loops, leaving the front loops. We are going to add a different pattern to this front loops after we complete the base of the project. So continue to make 1 single stitch, leaving the front loops, work only in the back loops throughout the row until you reach the starting point. So once we have reached the slip stitch part, make 1 single stitch on top of that one as well. So that's total 24 single stitches in the 11th row. Now remove the stitch marker and let's start making the 12th row. So make 1 single stitch and then put a stitch marker back onto the top of this stitch to mark the beginning of 12th row. And continue to make 1 single stitch throughout the row. So we are not adding any increases or decreases in this row. Just continue 1 stitch over each and every stitch until you reach the starting point, and in 12th row also you will have 24 single stitches. Once the 12th row is completed, this is how the project looks like. There will be a small line like structure because we have left the front loops while working 11th row. Now let's start making 13th row. Begin with 1 single stitch, Put the stitch marker back to mark the beginning of 13th row. And the pattern is 3 single stitch and 1 increase. As we have already completed 1 single stitch, that's the second single stitch, and this is the third single stitch. That's 1, 2 and 3. Now in the next stitch we'll make an increase. And now that's the first repetition. We are going to repeat this pattern for 6 times in total. So let's do the second repetition. 1, 2, 3, and in the next stitch make 1 increase. And continue this pattern throughout the row until you reach the starting point. So 3 single stitch increase should be repeated throughout the row for 6 times. So here I am making the last increase of the 13th row, and by the end of this row you will have 30 single stitches. Remove the stitch marker and let's start making the 14th row. Begin with 1 single stitch and put the stitch marker into the stitch to mark the beginning of 14th row. Now for this, the pattern is 2 single stitch increase and 2 single stitch. We have already completed 1 single stitch. Now make 1 single stitch in the next one. So that's 2 single stitches, and then we are doing an increase, 1 and 2. So 2 stitches in the same stitch, that's an increase. Now make 2 more single stitches. That's 1, and in the next stitch another 1. So that's the repetition. 2 single stitches, 1 increase and 2 single stitches, and we are going to repeat that pattern for 6 times in total. So that's 2 single stitches, increase and 2 single stitches. So that's the second repetition, and repeat it 4 more times until you reach the starting point. And by the end of the 14th row you will have 36 single stitches, making the last 2 single stitches of 14th row, and then remove the stitch marker. And this is how the shape will look like. So it will slowly, gradually increase the shape, like increase the sizes and stitch count. Remove the stitch marker. Let's start making the 15th row. Begin with 1 single stitch as usual. Put the stitch marker back to mark the beginning of 15th row. And for this one we are going to repeat the pattern of 5 single stitch and increase, as we have already completed 1. That's 2, 3, 4, 5. That's 5 single stitches, and in the next stitch make 1 increase. 2 single stitches in the same stitch. And now we are going to repeat this pattern throughout the row until the starting point, and this completes 15th row with 42 single stitches. That's an increase. And see the shape, it's slightly bigger than the previous rows. And now we are going to work a slab kind of structure at the base of our project. So for that, the next row we are going to work only in the back loops. So just like how we have done in the 11th row, we are going to begin with a slip stitch, tighten the slip stitch, and now from the next stitch we are going to work only in the back loops. So insert the needle into the back loop, drop a loop and make a single stitch, and now we'll mark this stitch as the first single stitch of row 16. Now continue to make 1 single stitch in each and every stitch throughout the row until you reach the starting point, but make sure you are inserting the needle only into the back loop. In the written pattern, BLO means back loop only. And now continue this pattern throughout the row until the starting point. Now by the end of the 16th row, you will have 42 single stitches. As we have not done any increase or decreases, the count will remain the same, just like in the 15th row. Now remove the stitch marker. And now let's start making the 17th row. Begin with 1 single stitch, put the stitch marker back, and this marks the beginning of the 17th row. and in this row we are just continuing to make one single stitch in each and every stitch throughout the row, but this time we are putting the needle in the entire stitch, not just in any loop. So just continue to make one single stitch in each and every stitch throughout the row until you reach the starting point again, and this one will complete 17th row with 42 single stitches. And if you see, it will give you a nice shape of a base for this project. Now remove the stitch marker, and for the 18th row we are going to start with the slip stitch, and we are again ignoring this slip stitch, and we are working only in the back loops, but this time we are going to follow the pattern. The pattern is 5 single stitch and 1 decrease. So let's begin with 1 single stitch and put a stitch marker to mark the beginning of the first stitch of 18th row. That's 1, and then into the back loop make the second stitch, that's 2, and now into the next stitch in the back loop make the third single stitch, and then 4 and 5. Now we are going to make an decrease, so drop a loop from the first stitch, again insert and drop a loop from the second stitch. Now you will have 3 loops on the hook, yarn over and draw the yarn through all the loops on the hook. So that's a single crochet decrease. So we'll make 5 single stitch and 1 decrease, and we'll repeat that pattern throughout the row. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and now we are making a decrease in the next 2 stitches. Insert, yarn under, pull up a loop from the first one, hold the loop on the hook, insert into the next stitch, yarn under and pull up a loop from the second stitch. Now you'll have 3 loops on the hook, yarn over and draw the yarn through all 3 loops at a time. So that's a decrease. And now repeat this for 4 more times until you reach the starting point. And this completes the 18th row with 36 single stitches. We are making a last decrease of the 6th repetition in the 18th row. Now remove the stitch marker. And now if you check the shape, this one will slightly turn inside. As we are now working on decreases, the pattern will slowly reduce in size, stitches gets closer, and this will give you the shape of the required project. Now let's start making 19th row. Begin with 1 single stitch and then put a stitch marker in the first stitch as a starting point for 19th row. And for this row the pattern is 2 single stitch, decrease and 2 single stitch. So that's 1 single stitch is already completed, and then this is the second single stitch. And now we are going to make a invisible decrease. So how to do an invisible decrease? You can put a needle into the front loop of the first stitch, turn your hook a little bit and insert the hook into the front loop of the next stitch. Now yarn under, pull up the loop from these 2 front loops at a time. Now you will have 2 loops on the hook, complete the single stitch. So that is an invisible decrease. And now continue to make 1 single stitch in the next 2 stitches. So that's 2 single stitch, 1 invisible decrease and 2 single stitch. And now we are going to repeat this pattern for total 6 times in this row. As first repetition is already completed, we are making the second repetition. So that's 2 single stitches and now 1 invisible decrease. So insert the hook into the front loop of first stitch, turn your hook and insert the hook into the front loop of the next stitch, yarn under, pull up a loop and make a single stitch. That's a decrease, and then make 2 single stitches. This completes the second repetition. And now continue to do this pattern throughout the row until you reach the starting point, and by the end of the 19th row you will have 30 single stitches. And if you see, the stitches will come even more closer to the center. Now let's start making the 20th row. Begin with 1 single stitch, put the stitch marker on top of the stitch to mark the beginning of 20th row. And the pattern for this row is 3 single stitches and decrease. So begin with 1 single stitch, that's 2 and 3. Now we are going to make a decrease. Again we will make invisible decrease. In Amigurumi toys, whenever it's possible, we are going to make invisible decrease, but just that in the previous row where we have done on back loop only decreases, at that time we have made a normal decrease instead of an invisible decrease. So now for this row we are just continuing to make the pattern of 3 single stitch decrease throughout the row for 6 repetitions, and that is 1 invisible decrease. That's right now what we are doing. And now continue this pattern throughout the row until the starting point. Here I am making the last invisible decrease, and this completes the 20th row with 24 single stitches. Now stop your work here and let's add stuffing into this project. So now for this project, remember the top portion should be stuffed in completely, and whereas the bottom portion can be stuffed in loosely. The reason is the top portion should hold the stiff and rigid shape, whereas the bottom portion, it shouldn't turn into a ball because we need a flat bottom, so we don't have to overstuff the bottom part. So we can stuff the bottom part loosely. And now once it is done, let's continue with the pattern. Begin with the single stitch for 21 row and then put a stitch marker. And now we are making a decrease. That's insert the needle into the front loops of next 2 stitches. Pull up a loop and make a single stitch. So that's the invisible decrease, and again 1 single stitch. So this is the pattern we are going to repeat throughout the row for 6 times until the starting point. That's the first repetition, and now we are making the second repetition. So while working after putting the stuffing, it makes a little bit tough to put the needle into the stitches as the stuffing comes into the stitches all the time. So put down the stitches, like press down the stuffing into the project, and then you continue to work so that the stuffing doesn't come outside. Now continue this pattern until the starting point, and by the end of the 21st row you will have 18 single stitches. Remove the stitch marker and let's start making the 22nd row. Begin with 1 single stitch. Put the stitch marker back into the first stitch to mark the beginning of the 22nd row, and for this row we are going to make 1 single stitch and 1 decrease. So that's 1 single stitch already completed, and now we are making 1 invisible decrease. This pattern we are going to repeat it throughout the row for 6 times. So let's do it for the second repetition. 1 single stitch and 1 decrease, and continue this pattern throughout the row until the starting point. This completes the 22nd row with 12 single stitches. I am making the last decrease of 22nd row. Now remove the stitch marker, go ahead and let's do the last 23rd row for the base of this project. Remove the stitch marker, make 1 invisible decrease. So insert the hook into the front loops of next 2 stitches, yarn under, drop a loop and make a single stitch, and that's the first decrease of 23rd row. Now to put mark the beginning of the first stitch, put a stitch marker on top of this one. Now let's continue to make decreases throughout the row, and we'll have a total of 6 stitches. Now the second invisible decrease. Working on the last row is little bit trickier, but with practice we can master the technique. And that's the third, and that's the third invisible decrease, and continue for the rest of the 3 decreases. And once it is done, remove the stitch marker, insert the hook into the next stitch, and then make a slip stitch. So yarn over and draw the yarn through all the loops at a time. tighten the stitch, make chain 1 and trim the thread by leaving a long tail end, for which we are going to use it to give the bottom flat shape for the project. Now pull out the loop on the hook outside completely and fasten off. So the less stuffing at the bottom helps us to get the flat base. Now let's work on the front loops that we have left in the project while we are working the 11th row. So turn your project upside down and insert the needle into the front loop of any of the stitches in the 11th row. And now let's start making the row 1 for this one. Again, I am using the same grey color yarn. Now put the yarn on the hook as shown in the video and pull up the loop. Adjust the loop and make chain 1. We are going to ignore this chain 1 as a stitch. And now insert the hook into the same front loop. Drop a loop and make a single stitch. If you want, you can put a stitch marker. If not, if you can identify the stitch, you don't need one. Just continue to make one single stitch in each and every stitch throughout the row until you reach the starting point, but do not make the last single stitch, which means we have to work 23 single stitches. So which makes one single stitch in each and every stitch. Nicely make one single stitch in each and every stitch throughout the row until you have last one stitch remaining. So total you will have 23, and once it is done we will continue with the remaining pattern. So here I have completed 23 single stitches, and this is how the middle part looks like. Now in the last stitch, insert your hook and make one slip stitch. Now make chain 5. 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5. Now leave the first chain from the hook, and in the rest of the 4 chains make one single stitch in each chain. That's 2, 3 and 4. So this is the side part. And now make another slip stitch into the same stitch and put the needle on top of the first stitch and finish the row. So that is the first line. And now let's start making the second row. We'll start with chain 1, and then we are going to ignore that chain 1 as a stitch. So we'll start making the pattern from the first stitch itself. So yarn over, insert the hook into the first stitch, yarn over and pull up a loop. Now you will have 3 loops on the hook. Yarn over and draw the yarn through all the 3 loops at a time. So that's a half double stitch, and we are going to make 2 half double crochet stitches into the first stitch, which means we are making a half double crochet increase in the first stitch. So that's a HDC increase. Now continue to make half double crochet increases in each and every stitch until you have completed 23 increases. So that's the second increase, and now making the third increase in the next stitch. So that's first HDC and then one more HDC into the same stitch, which makes a HDC increase. And likewise continue HDC increases until you have completed 23 half double stitches increases. Now we are working the half double crochet increase in the 23rd stitch. So make the last half double stitch, and you will see this forms a nice straight flat part across the project in the middle. Now let's continue the row. Now we are going to work on the side of the foundation chain. The next stitch what you are seeing is the slip stitch. We are going to ignore that slip stitch and directly start working on the foundation chain. The back loops of the foundation chain will work 3 half double crochets, 1 in each. So that's first half double stitch, Don't worry about the gap in middle. It will automatically be closed once the project is completed. Now in the next chain, make one more half double stitch. So that's 2. And in the next one, make one more half double stitch. So that's 3. Once the 3 HDCs are completed, we'll have one more chain remaining, and in that chain we are going to make a half double crochet increase. That is 2 half double stitches into the same stitch. That's 1 HDC and one more HDC into the same stitch. Now the next, what you can see is a single crochet. We are going to ignore the chain 1 stitch which we have done while making the chain 5. Now on top of the single crochet, we are going to make a half double crochet increase. So insert the hook into the first stitch of single stitch and make 2 half double crochet stitches, and this will give you the nice curve shape at the edge of the flat part. Now we'll see 3 more stitches. Make 1 half double stitch in the next 3 stitches each. So that's 1, 2 and 3. Once it is done, ignore all the slip stitches and directly make a slip stitch on top of the first half double crochet. This completes the second row. Now let's start making the third row. If you see, you can see the flat part like that. As I told you, the gaps will be automatically concealed with the stitches. And this was the outcome after completing the second row. Now for the last row, we are going to make single crochet stitches border for this. So make 1 single stitch in each and every stitch throughout the row, across all the stitches until you reach the starting point. Upon reaching the last stitch, fasten off the yarn and pull out the loop. If you want, you can just make a slip stitch and then fasten off, but this kind of attaching the sides will give you a cleaner finish. So cut the yarn and pull out the loop from the last stitch, and now take the closing tail end into the tapestry needle and then insert the needle into the next stitch where it has to be attached. So insert the needle into the next stitch into both the loops where we have to attach it and pull the yarn out. And now take your needle back into the last stitch and insert the needle into the back loop and also the back bump of the last stitch. And this will close the final row and you will have a nicer and cleaner finish. And now turn your project onto the back side and then secure it by making a small knot on the back side of the project. And once it is secured, just weave in the tail end into few stitches next to this knot, and then finally trim the excess threads close to the project. And we are going to repeat the same thing with the starting tail end as well. Take the yarn into the needle, weave in into a couple of stitches, and then for the rest of the yarn you can just tuck it into the stuffing part. You don't have to weave in, or you don't have to trim the excess thread. And now let's add the detailing part to the project. For that I'm using a white color yarn and just added the few details of the namam and the tilak. So for the 3 horizontal lines I'm using a white color yarn. Identify the position. If you are not sure, you can confirm it by putting some pearl head pins or put some stitch markers where you have to sew the details. And once you are done with all the 3 horizontal lines, we'll secure the threads on the back side and then fasten off the excess threads. And for the visible thread on the back side, we are going to just use a crochet hook and pull the knot along with the excess threads into the stuffing. And now for the tilak part, I am using a red color yarn And now I'm going to make a knot as shown in the video. So knot it for 3 times, or if you wanted a longer tilak, wrap the yarn for even more times, like 5 or 6. Here I'm doing it just for 3 times, and slowly make a knot so that it will give you a nice blob kind of look. Now I'm going to attach it across the center horizontal line, and now I'm going to weave in the threads at the exact position again by using a tapestry needle. So take the tail end into the tapestry needle and sew it across the center horizontal line. The top thread, once it is done, take out the needle and then weave in the other tail end as well. Both of them threads have to come out of the same hole so that we can weave in the excess parts into the project carefully. So just like how we have pulled out the white yarns, pull the red yarns also into the stuffing part. And now let's see the finishing part. Take the closing tail end into the tapestry needle. Here I am taking the longer needle. Before that we have used the smaller one. So insert the needle into the front loop of all the 6 stitches in the last rows. So that's the second one. This is the third front loop. 4, 5 and 6. Once the yarn is out through all 6 loops, draw the yarn, pull the yarn gently so that the opening will be closed out completely. Now insert the needle into the next stitch and then make a closing knot. So this closes the project, and now we have to give the flat base at the bottom. So for that we are going to use this tapestry needle and insert the needle from the bottom opening all the way through the magic center on the top. So get the needle from the magic ring on the top and then draw the yarn all the way through the center of the project. And now gently pull the yarn on the top to give the flat base at the bottom. Pull it tightly so that the flat base will stay flat and it won't wiggle at the base. Now held it tighter and then secure it by making one final knot on top of the project. Make one knot by holding the thread tightly. Wrap the yarn around the needle. Again hold it tightly so that it doesn't lose the tightness at the bottom, and then pull the thread to secure the knot. And once it is done, you can just weave in the excess thread into the stuffing and then trim the excess thread close to the project. And this way your project will have a nicer, cleaner finishings and a better shape. And with that you have made yourself this beautiful crochet Shiva Lingam. I hope you all enjoyed watching this tutorial. Do give this pattern a try and let me know your thoughts in the comments section below. The written pattern is given in the description. Do check it out. Do not forget to share your work to me on Instagram. See you all in the next video. Thank you for watching. Please like the video, share it and subscribe to DIYKraftZ.